Hi guys, coming at you with a highly requested video lesson for evaluation. The big question then of this video lesson is, what is evaluation? And this is of course all directed towards first language English, paper 2, directed writing. Don't forget that I've got more free video lessons like this on my website, that's taughtly.co.uk, where I also offer one-to-one tutoring, group classes, a first language English revision masterclass coming up in March and April, courses that you can do, and teaching resources. Now, why is evaluation important? So for directed writing, you get two different marks. You get a reading mark and you get a writing mark. For the reading mark, if you get one evaluation point, then you have got some successful evaluation, and the examiner has to give you at least 10 out of 15 because you've got some successful evaluation. The only exception where you wouldn't get 10 is if you just don't have any explicit details, or you've got very, very few explicit details from the two texts. And by explicit details, I mean like summary of the ideas that the text mention. But the bar is not that high. All you need is one evaluation point and you're on 10. And then it roughly kind of goes like 2 evaluation points 11, 3 evaluation points 12, etc. If you don't get any evaluation, then you cannot get 10 or above. You'll have to be in 7 to 9 or even lower. For 7 to 9, you will be having lots of explicit ideas and giving your own opinion on the topic, but not evaluating. And for 5 to 6, you will be having some explicit ideas, not very many, and no opinion, and some of your ideas aren't even relevant to the two texts. Therefore, we know that evaluation is super important for that reading mark, and that's probably why I get so many comments asking me to clarify what is evaluation. So, evaluation. It's basically you reading the texts, and from the text you picking out implicit ideas, things that are not clearly said, and evaluating those implicit ideas. So generally, evaluation can be being critical of the texts and making an effective counter-argument. So you're not reading the text and just going, yeah, great point. You're actually reading them and thinking, is this correct or is this false? Is this a strong argument or is this a weak argument? So this would be evaluation. It can also be taking ideas in the texts and extending it into a new context. So for example, it might be that you've got a text all about demolishing buildings and how like healthy modern buildings can be really, really good for the workplace and workers. And then you have to write a school magazine article about it. And so therefore you're taking those ideas that are about workers and applying them to a new context of, well, why could those same ideas be useful for schools? And that's implicit, right? It's not something that's said, and that's why it is evaluative. Evaluation could also be finding a middle ground between the two texts. So you've got your text A and your text B, and they usually have got like the complete opposite perspective on a particular topic or issue. So you're trying to think, well, what is the middle point of these two texts? Is there a compromise that they can reach? So evaluation isn't one single thing. It's basically you looking at these texts with a critical mind and being curious. You are probing at them, poking, and thinking, is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Could we extend this idea to another area? Is this issue simply black and white, or is there a middle ground and a compromise that we can reach? So anything that is unsaid in these 3 areas tends to be evaluation. In general, you want to avoid that summarising and agreeing with the texts. If you just summarise and say, yes, good point, that's never evaluation. To carry on with that point then, what isn't evaluation? So as we've said, just summarising the writer's arguments and agreeing with them is not evaluation. I really hate it when students do this. So when they make up external research or statistics, they're like, 60% of people agree that podcasts should be allowed at work. Great. That's not evaluation, that's just a random statistic that you've made up. So everything that you say should be focused specifically on what you've read, not on what other people might say. You're supposed to be responding to the ideas in those two texts, not just making up random stuff that neither of them said. Giving your general opinion if it's unrelated to the two texts. So for example, if it was the podcast past paper, which I've got another video coming out on shortly, then that would you just be saying like, oh, I think that listening to podcasts is really great. It really helps me to feel happier. but that's not actually like a specific point that either of the two texts make. Or a call for arms, where you just generally say, let's fight for our right to listen to podcasts, let's fight against school uniforms, let's fight to protect our buildings. And you're just trying to like get everyone to be like, yeah, let's fight and let's do it. But you're not really being evaluative, you're just making a very vague and general point. In Cambridge's own words from their examiner report, they explain evaluation as more effective evaluation tended to challenge some of the ideas rather than reproducing them, and to suggest an understanding of the need for the interests of the tourists, the population and the environment to be better balanced. So this idea that for this particular past paper, the evaluation needed you to challenge the idea, not just reproduce and copy them, and finding a better balance, a middle ground between the two texts. Alright, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys 4 example past papers, and I'm going to show you examples of evaluation for each of them. So first we'll look at the question and then you'll see the examples. So here's the podcast one. Again, I've got a video coming out about this very, very soon. So the question says, imagine you are an employee of a business in which listening to podcasts is not allowed. Write a letter to persuade your boss that staff should be allowed to listen to podcasts in their workplace. So for this one, you have to have one point of view. And you know that because it says that you are writing to persuade your boss that staff should be allowed to listen to podcasts. So in other words, Cambridge want you to fully argue in favour of podcasts. So Cambridge are expecting you to argue not a balanced argument, but a one-sided argument. And so for this one, all of the evaluation points were counter arguments, right? So you didn't get any marks for agreeing, obviously, because the question is asking you specifically to disagree. Here are the clues. Here are some evaluation examples then. So in the text, in one of the texts, it says, we're not allowed to listen to podcasts during the day at work as our boss thinks it might be distracting and stop us from connecting as a team. My evaluation of this idea, podcasts are distracting, they stop connections, are podcasts can be a catalyst for further team bonding. Team members can listen to podcasts on a wide array of topics from marketing to improving sales, which can then be discussed together during break times, building stronger relationships. So this one here is a counter-argument evaluation. This text says it's distracting, stops us from building relationships. Well, then you need to stop and think, well, actually, why could that be wrong? Why could listening to podcasts actually help the team to form better relationships? Well, it gives you something to talk about. You're not with your friends, you're not with people that you've chosen to hang around with necessarily. And so sometimes it can be hard to think of things to say for some people. And so therefore, if you've got something in common to talk about, then that will actually help you to become friends and become close with the people that you're working with. So that is evaluation because it is an effective counter-argument. Now, likewise from the same paper, so the original text says, whether you want to learn a new skill for work, keep up with the news, or need to be inspired, there is a podcast for you. I don't listen to music as much anymore as there's so much out there to learn about. Podcasts offer a range of topics and for the most part they're free. Now this comes from the other text. So this was the text that was arguing in favour of podcasts. So for this one, obviously I don't need to counter argue it because it's making the point that I'm making. But what I need to do is I need to take the idea that they're saying, I need to extend it and apply it to a new situation. So in my new situation, it's about the workplace. I'm writing to my boss. So I need to think, how could this be a benefit for my boss and for the workplace? So they help you learn a new skill and they're free. Well, why would that appeal to my boss? My evaluation was, since there are many free educational podcasts, this can also be used as a method of completely free professional development, upskilling employees without costing the business any money. So here, right, it would appeal to my boss because it improves our skills at work and doesn't cost the business any money. I'm appealing to my audience there too, because what do bosses like? Free stuff, profit, right? So I've taken this same idea, but I've extended it to the workplace and appealing to my boss, and therefore it is evaluation. So notice on the first one, counter-arguing. The second one, this implicit idea that I'm extending to a new situation. Here is the second past paper. Write an article for your school or college magazine with the title Small Change, Big Difference. In your article, you should evaluate the views given in both texts about saving the planet, give your own views based on what you have read about whether your school or college can make a difference and how. So in this one, it's trying to think, well, what side exactly does Cambridge want us to argue? So for this one, it's not quite so clear. It does have some more middle ground arguments that it wants you to make. But the title is giving us a clue that perhaps it wants us to say that a small change can cause a big difference. Now, often the mark schemes aren't completely balanced. There are some that are completely balanced, but usually Cambridge do have like one particular perspective that's got more evaluation points than the other one. So anything that's like more in favour of the environment, for example, is usually an evaluation point. So some of these like more like liberal ideas, I suppose. And also the phrase whether your school or college can make a difference and how. Well, I doubt that Cambridge are going to want you to say schools and colleges can make absolutely no difference whatsoever, so we should all give up and have plastic bottles and just wait for the end of the world to come, right? So they want you to have like this more like hopeful, optimistic perspective. Here's some evaluation examples for that past paper. So text A says, compared with the scale of the disaster, changing individual behaviour is pathetically inadequate. So the idea that actually climate change is so big that one individual can't do enough. It's pathetic to even try. It has to come on a big scale, otherwise it won't really work. Whereas text B says, every individual, every school or college, every community makes a difference every day. So you can see they've got two very, very different ideas. One is individual effort is pathetically useless, and the other one is every single individual and every single school can make a difference. So they're completely different ends of the spectrum. So the evaluation was actually finding a middle ground between the two texts, trying to find a compromise. So my evaluation was, now is the time to understand that saving the planet will require both individual and collective effort. It's not either or. It's not simply down to individuals and it's not simply down to governments. Both. We need to do both. If the scale of the problem is so big, then I need to stop using plastic bottles and my government needs to have laws put in place as well. So I found that middle ground and that kind of compromise in between the two texts, and that's what got me my evaluation. I also got an evaluation for an effective counter argument. So as I said, this past paper did really want you to argue that young people in schools and colleges can do something to improve the environment. So one of the texts said, however, every example of major environmental progress, reducing acid rain, improving air quality, restoring the ozone layer, has been the result of national legislation or a global treaty. So this idea that actually the only time that we've really made a difference has been when it's been a national law or many countries coming together to create a treaty. So now I'm trying to come up with an effective counter argument of actually why this information might still mean that young people in schools can make a difference. It's not hopeless. So my evaluation was, yet we must realise that governments and corporations are also formed of people, and it could be us as leaders of the future. Not only that, but we have the power to influence these entities by lobbying the government or choosing which party we vote for at elections. We shouldn't act helpless as though these institutions are entirely out of our influence. So okay, yeah, all of these big changes have come from governments, cool. Who do you think the government is? It's people. Who do you think the people that go to school are? They're people, right? So it's not like, oh, the government is kind of like this strange organisation of which we have no influence over. Actually, we could become politicians as students, becoming politicians as leaders of the future, that we can influence our government by lobbying them, sending letters, complaints, protests and so on. And ultimately, we also choose who we elect. So we can elect people who will put these legislations in place for the environment. So an effective counter argument, this one trying to say individual action hopeless because it's only governments that can do anything. My counter argument, yeah, but governments can be influenced. So evaluation. Example number 3. So this past paper says, write an article for your school or college newspaper about how young people should communicate in their first jobs. In your article you should evaluate the ideas, attitudes and opinions in both texts. Advise young people on the factors they should consider when communicating with their work colleagues. So for this one, I doubt that Cambridge are going to say to you oh, we should all be very, very rude in our first jobs, right? But it is implying that there are factors that we should consider as young people entering the workplace. Now, I did this one recently with a tutee, and her mistake was she took the ideas in the text and took them as fact, right? So this is how young people communicate and this is why it's bad. And actually what you needed to do for this past paper was be a bit more critical of the ideas. If these texts are criticising young people Are their criticisms fair? Are they true? You know? So don't just take the text as absolute truth, because for this one, Cambridge wanted you to poke at it and say, actually, this isn't a very strong argument and it's not representative of reality. Some evaluation examples for that past paper. So from the text, it said, newer employees can be encouraged to maintain decorum and formality and maybe go easy on the emojis in emails. So here we needed to be a bit critical. Like, why do we have to have decorum? Why must we be like fancily mannered in the workplace? Why must we remain formal in the workplace? Why not put emojis in emails? Like, so you can't just take these ideas of, oh yeah, clearly that's right. Why? Is it right? Is it fair? I put smiley faces in emails. I think it's lovely. So that Cambridge wanted you here to be critical and to counter-argue it a little bit. So my evaluation was, breaking down boundaries between co-workers might not be a bad thing. After all, why should the boss automatically strike fear and deference into an employee's heart? Oh, I put 2 after alls. Never mind. After all, closer relationships might actually benefit the business and make the workplace a more pleasant place to be. So why do we have to have these boundaries? Why should I automatically respect my boss and see them as a better and superior person to me? And actually, like, do these skills of being polite and formal in the workplace, do they actually create good results for businesses? Can be more close, friendly, like normal, make the workplace a better place to be and therefore get better results. So my evaluation here is being critical of those ideas and not accepting them as fact. The next example is when I'm trying to find the middle ground. So these 2 texts were basically arguing that young people are too informal in the workplace, and then the other one was arguing actually it can be quite nice sometimes to be a bit informal. So one of the texts said, a generation used to informal, near constant contact rejects the accepted ways of doing things, spurning the prim email in favour of a quick message, emojis included. But that can be tough for older generations who are used to defining the professional rules of communication. So this idea of like a generation gap. Older people expect us to communicate one way and younger people expect to communicate another way. And I feel like the text is trying to get you to say one way is right. But is one way right? Like, can't we just have like a mixture of being formal but putting a smiley face as well? So my evaluation here is finding that middle ground between the 2 texts, a compromise. So I say, ultimately we must realise there is no right or wrong way to communicate. The most effective communication is clear, friendly and builds relationship. Why not compromise between the older and younger generations? After all, what would make a formal and respectful email all the better? A smiley emoji at the end. Everyone is a winner. So this idea of, I'm looking at the 2 texts, there's no right or wrong way to communicate. What even is good communication? Good communication is clear, friendly and builds relationships. So as long as you're doing this, why does it matter if you put an emoji? Can't we find some compromise between the 2 different styles of communication? And our final example is example 4, and the past paper says, imagine that you are a student which is considering whether or not to demolish an old building on its site. Write the speech you give to a meeting of local people expressing your views. In your speech you should evaluate the ideas, attitudes and opinions about building given in both texts. Based on what you've read, justify your views on whether or not the school's old building should be replaced or reused. So here, there's arguments for and against, right? So it's whether or not to demolish the old building and whether it should be replaced or reused. So keep emphasising these 2 different perspectives makes me think Cambridge is going to want a more balanced perspective, but they do ultimately want you to make a decision, should it be replaced or reused? You're going to get some evaluation points surely here by saying that it shouldn't be demolished. Like, in general, Cambridge are a little bit more environmentally friendly. So you simply saying like destroy it and replace it with something else. I mean, there are some evaluation points in there for that, in fairness, but there are slightly more for the more environmentally friendly options. So let's get into some examples. From the original text, it said, numerous studies show how a healthy building can reduce illness and absenteeism amongst workers, increasing worker productivity, raising test scores amongst students, and lead to greater satisfaction in the workplace. Now for this one, I am applying these ideas into a new context. So most of these are about workers, but here we're applying it instead to students and schools. So notice it's talking about illness and absenteeism in workers and increasing worker productivity. So how might these things apply to school students? Modern, clean and creative school buildings can encourage more pupils to attend school, reducing sick days and therefore increasing student progress. happier students and higher grades. What more can you want? So this is evaluation because I've taken these ideas and I've applied it to a new context, extending that idea. The next example is another example of finding that middle ground, that compromise between the two texts. So in text A it says, even when still in use, the enormous cost of repairing some very old buildings can be prohibitive, put you off. So they become shabby and unsightly. And in text B, some buildings must entirely be restored and repaired sensitively at considerable expense before upgrading for contemporary use is possible. So they've both got this idea of cost, of it being expensive. It's expensive to repair the buildings, basically, is what they're arguing. Now I'm trying to find some sort of middle ground here of how we can balance the issue of cost without totally destroying the building. So middle ground, compromise. And my evaluation would be completely rebuilding from scratch is considerably more expensive than adapting and reinvesting in existing buildings. If we can update rather than rebuild, we can have the best of both worlds. Historic buildings with environmentally friendly interiors at a lower cost, both financially and to our planet. So this idea, do we need to completely destroy or completely keep the building? Can we find a middle ground? How about we keep the outside of the building and change the inside, right? So that we've got the old and the new together, therefore best of both worlds. And it benefits us not only financially, but also to our environment. So here, middle ground between the two texts, therefore evaluation. Wrapping up then with a revision card of reminders of everything that you need to know for evaluation. Here are my key takeaways. Remain critical of what you've read. Don't accept the texts as truth. Do try to find a middle ground between the two texts if they've got very, very differing opinions. Extend ideas to apply to new contexts, often to students or young people, comes up quite a lot. Analyse the question that you've been given. Does it seem like you should be more balanced or more argumentative? Obviously, if it directly says to persuade your boss in favour of blah blah blah, then it's completely unbalanced and argumentative. For directed writing, always use your own words and don't copy directly from the text. Do remember to include explicit ideas from both texts, that is you summarising the main arguments that each of them make in your own words. And a good structure for that will be to go explicit idea that the text says, followed by your evaluation, and keep repeating that structure. And remember that you only need one successful evaluation. So if this seems hard to you, you only need one. And most students do eventually find one. So don't panic. If you find one, you've already got 10 out of 15 for reading, which is a very good mark and won't stop you from getting your A star, as long as everything else is good. I hope that this lesson was useful to you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and that you can find more like this on my website taughtly.co.uk. Free video lessons and courses and teaching resources if you are a teacher. If you would like to study with me and have some tutoring, I offer one-to-one tutoring, self-formed small group classes, and I've got my revision masterclass coming up for First Language English that starts in May and it runs until the end of April. 2 live lessons a week, so 18 lessons in total, and I will also mark one of your exam practices every single week. So if you want to get a directed writing marked by me, come and join my masterclass. The links to everything are in the description. Thank you so much for watching this video lesson, and I hope to see you in my next one. Bye.